I really, it's my attention. My wife gets cabin fever. We wrestle. No visible signs of wear.
But yeah, I'm there about half the time.
November can be busy.
Sometimes you can start a ski, but you're not guaranteed. No, you're not.
Missing months. I don't know where that came from. It's horrible.
Good morning. Welcome to the Community Library. My name is Jenny Emery Davidson. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Library. And I will tell you, this morning, I am particularly feeling the resonance of one of my favorite quotations from literature, and it comes from Wallace Stegner. I've said it on this platform before. Wallace Stegner wrote that he wanted the West to have a civilization to match its scenery. And this time of year, yes, a civilization to match its scenery. And this time of year, I feel that so fully as I'm riding on the bike path and I'm seeing kids doing their cross-country skiing on skates and people on their bikes and people with their kids in strollers. I feel that when I'm at the library and I'm walking through the stacks and seeing people with their books and enjoying programs with all of you. And I feel it when I'm at Sun Valley on the lawn in the pavilion and listening to this extraordinary music that we all get access to for free because of the Sun Valley Music Festival. So it is a tremendous pleasure for the community library to collaborate each year for for the Upbeat with Alasdair programs. And it is my great pleasure to turn it directly over to the music conductor of the Sun Valley Music Festival, Maestro Neale.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jenny, for those very kind words of introduction. And as always, the thanks of the festival to the Community Library for this wonderful partnership that we enjoy over these years. So happy, this is my happy face because I'm in Sun Valley, and it's now just a matter of a couple of days before I see all of my dear friends and colleagues in the orchestra. We, as you probably know, we open the festival on Monday, and I'm so thrilled to be making music again with this extraordinary group of friends and for such a wonderful and enthusiastic audience. Today, I thought it would be fun to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the repertoire that we are going to be undertaking over the course of the next 3.5 weeks. I'm making a couple of assumptions along the way, which is always a dangerous thing to do, but painting with the broadest of brushes, I'm going to assume that most of you are perhaps at least passingly familiar with such pieces as the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto or Romeo and Juliet, a couple of the very standard repertoire pieces. But there's such a variety of music that we're doing over the next few weeks that I thought it might be fun to share with you some pieces that perhaps you may be less familiar with, or in many cases not at all familiar with. For want of a better phrase, we can say that these are hidden gems, music that is absolutely of the first order, but because of the vast canon of repertoire open to us in what we loosely and inaccurately term classical music, there are nonetheless a huge amount of pieces that are not done quite so much. So it's going to be a little bit of a fire hose, but I hope that this kind of tasting menu will whet your appetite for the festival ahead, and that you'll end up coming to the concerts that I'm going to cite here. The Festival Chamber Orchestra, which occupies the first week of the festival, can mine a rich field of music, particularly from the period of roughly 1770 to 1828, which includes Haydn's first symphonies up till the death of Beethoven and Schubert. And in that spirit, one of the pieces that we'll be doing this week is Haydn's Symphony No. 80, which will be conducted by the fabulous Stephanie Childress. Haydn wrote 104 symphonies, one of which, number 94, is entitled The Surprise Symphony. Frankly, that's a title that probably should be applied to all 104 of Haydn's symphonies, because Haydn was the master of the surprise. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we are engaged in what I would call active listening, it involves a kind of a constant guessing game as like, what could happen next? And Haydn is a brilliant sort of, how would I say, he knows how to wrong foot us and divert our attention away from where we expect the music to go. And the 80th Symphony is a perfect example of that. For one, it starts in the minor, and that in and of itself is a departure from expectations. It's an example of more like his mid-period symphonies, which was part of a movement called Sturm und Drang. We'd actually adopted the German phrase in English, storm and stress, which laid particular emphasis on a kind of volatility of expression, drama, conflict. And this is how this symphony begins. And I'm going to play you part of the first movement. One of the surprises, by the way, of this first movement is that it's 5 minutes long. So it's very, very compressed. He does away with what sometimes could be, was not exactly the norm, but was not infrequent, that is to say, a slow introduction. He plunges us straight into D minor, and no sooner has the music start than it stops again. So I'm going to play you the very first minute and a bit of it, and that's what's in sonata form, the main form of first movements of symphonies and sonatas and string quartets, etc., is called the exposition, and it lays out a theme or group of themes in a home key, then it changes to another key, in this case F major, which is a close cousin of D minor. They share the same notes, more or less, and a secondary theme. And then there's a little surprise, a little goodie in the basket that he says to the very end of the exposition. Let's see if you can figure out what that is when it comes. Here's the beginning. Bet you didn't see that one coming. Isn't that the joy, though, that we're being led around by the nose, and just when you think you know what's going to happen next, there's always a surprise. A quick example of an even more sophisticated and wonderfully destabilizing surprise is the opening of the last movement. Now, we are, as human beings, pattern-seeking mammals. We look for ways, visual and oral, that we can group things into things that make sense. And in one way we do that is when we listen to music, we try and establish a regularity of pulse and just without even thinking about it, what meter it's in. And Haydn here plays the ultimate joke with our expectations. It's as if I'd invite you to play a little game, and I'm taking as my point of departure that famous Wendy's commercial in the 1980s. Remember the 80s? And it was the tagline was that tiny little crotchety old woman that would complain about all the rivals. Where's the beef? Remember? Do you remember that? Okay, good. Because we go back right to the 80s. So this game is called Where's the Beat? And you'll see why. Try to group, imagine tapping your feet and go, where is one? Where's the main beat of the bar? Good luck. See what I mean? I bet you had no idea where you were before that. Well, if you keep a close eye on Stephanie when she conducts that, she'll be giving you, since she has to actually beat what the real pulse is, and I'm not going to tell you, but if you keep your eyes and ears open during that, you will be in on the joke, which is always a good place to be with Haydn. Then on to another hidden gem. Most of us are familiar with at least 2 or 3, 4 of the Beethoven symphonies, but one of the pieces of the 9 Beethoven symphonies that is least played is the 4th Symphony in B-flat major. It is a hidden gem because it tends to be overshadowed by these 2 huge pillars that surround it. On the one hand, the Eroica Symphony, which changed the boundaries of music in so many different ways. And the piece that followed it, the Fifth Symphony, which is iconic because it's one of these amazing journeys from darkness to light that Beethoven was famous for. In the middle is the Fourth Symphony that doesn't have the same obvious pretenses as either the Eroica or the Fifth Symphony, but nonetheless is an endless source of mystery, innovation, good humor, and all-around fun. It, however, has more than its share of surprises up its sleeve, not the least of which is the very beginning. Now, in the Eroica, Beethoven had established our immediate attention by these two huge E-flat major chords, like shut up, dee da dee dee dee. Now that I've got your attention. But Beethoven in the Fourth Symphony starts with an equally audacious gesture, but just at the opposite end of the scale, in a slow introduction that is as close as anything that I can think of to an image of somebody groping in complete darkness and treading very lightly on their toes, completely unaware of where the light is, for an extended period of time. I'm going to play you the whole of the introduction with a little bit of editorial commentary on the way, and then when we eventually come into the Allegro, it's a wonderful moment of transition. So here we go, a long-held note in the winds, which goes on forever. Beethoven's saying, "Where are we now?" Chord going to resolve. Let's do the same thing again. Music is the beginning, still groping, looking for somewhere to go. Well, where's this going to resolve? Doesn't. Thing now a half step above where it was before. Note for note. About. We appear to settle onto one note. Now. So whereas the Fifth Symphony takes the better part of, what, like 20, 25 minutes or so to go from darkness to light, the Fourth Symphony does it in a matter of 3 minutes. It's like we burst out of this darkness into full daylight and everything is all right with the world. And it's just, now where it's all high spirits and good fun. Beethoven could write a beautiful tune. He's mostly known for motivic invention, but when he needed, he could write a tune that really sounds beautiful to sing. And the second movement of this is a perfect example. But because nothing is ever completely straightforward with Beethoven, he underpins this beautiful melody that we hear in the violins with a completely different element in the second violins, and it's like a tick-tock or a heartbeat. It goes bum, ba-bum, 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 bum, ba-bum, bum, ba-bum, bum, ba-bum, ba. So you've got this duality, two very different things going on at the same time. Here's the opening of the second movement. Now the winds have the tune. Well, to hear the rest of this wonderful movement and the two movements that follow and all the wonderful surprises contained in that, all you have to do is go to the concert. So a few years ago, we played a wonderful and exciting concert opener called Masquerade by the British composer Anna Klein. I'm going to be playing another of her pieces this season for a group of solo strings. I think there are 15 of them, called Within Her Arms. And it's a very unusual but very, very effective piece for 6 solo violins, 3 solo violas, 3 solo cellos, and 3 solo basses, all of whom are in a semicircle. So there's almost an antiphonal effect at points. And it's written in memory of her mother. So it's an elegy, and a very touching one it is. It doesn't, I just played you a big melody, a tune of Beethoven's. This is not a piece that is necessarily about tunes and accompaniments, but of shifting textures and sort of gently caressing and touching figures and sort of sliding in and out of audibility. It's actually very hard to find the words to describe it, and it's perhaps best just left for me to play you some of the first couple of minutes that you get an idea of the sound world. It's mostly, during the course of its 15 minutes, quiet. There aren't many big full outbursts of sound. It's a much more like a reflective space, perhaps a side chapel or an apse, just to look around and get immersed in this very calm, centered, and loving sound world. Here's the beginning of Within Her Arms. That's Anna Klein's Sound World. Another composer that I introduced a couple of years ago to the festival is an Indian-American composer, Rina Esmail. We played, Orly Shahan played played a piece of hers called Sans. And we're going to do an orchestra piece of hers called Testament from a trilogy of pieces she wrote called Vishwas. It's based on traditional Indian legend. And in this piece, she incorporates elements of traditional Indian music with the Western orchestra, chamber orchestra. And the element that she adds is the Indian instrument, the tabla, which is a series of two drums, both basically played by one player, cross-legged, one higher than the other. And while it's an optional part, the piece is so much more effective when you hear the tabla interacting with the full orchestra. Tabla players are not exactly a dime a dozen here, but one of my best friends in San Francisco happens to be an expert player, Arun Segal, and he's going to be joining us for that. I'll play you a little bit of the, after a very short introduction, the faster part of the piece. It's not a great recording because you don't hear the tabla quite as prominently as one would like, but it gives you an idea of how Rina Esmail incorporates a lot of traditional Indian style melody as well as the tabla into the full orchestra texture. So here's a little bit of Testament from Vishwas. Comes the tabla. Now, this year is a very important one in terms of anniversaries because it marks the 150th anniversary of the birth of the great French composer Maurice Ravel, one of my personal favorites. And if you've been checking your schedule, you'll know that my next Upbeat with Alasdair in a couple of weeks' time is going to be just devoted to Ravel. So much more to come on that subject. But in terms of whetting your appetite for one of my favorite concerts of the season, the All Ravel program, I thought I might introduce you to a couple of pieces that you may be less familiar with. The first of these is an orchestration of one of the 5 piano pieces that he wrote under the collective title Miroir, or Mirrors. It's written in 1905. 2 or 3 of them Ravel orchestrated himself, but the one I'm going to play for you, he didn't actually orchestrate, but it was later orchestrated by the Australian composer Percy Grainger, who had a wonderful imagination. And this particular piece, which is entitled La Vallée des Cloches, the Valley of the Bells, he took Ravel's piano music and orchestrated it in a very unusual way for strings and a whole battery of piano-related instruments slash percussion, and created this wonderful sound world, already impressively evoked by Ravel in his piano textures, but made more explicit by the real evocation of bells and bell-like sounds in Granger's version. I might actually have time to play you the whole piece. It's about 6.5 minutes, but it plunges you into this wonderful fantasy world particularly on the outer sections of just percussive and bell-like sounds. In the middle, there's one of Ravel's most beautiful, sensuous, slow-moving melodies. I get the sense that if this is the Valley of the Bells, that we are floating, we're gliding over the valley, looking down at the beautiful sight before gradually coming back to earth and more in direct contact with the bells. This is what it sounds like. Here we are floating high above the valley. Gradually coming down. Magic, huh? That's the Ravel plus Granger, and the two are a wonderful combination. It should not surprise you, perhaps, listening to that both Ravel and Debussy and many others were captivated by, I think it was maybe about 1900, a big world exposition in Paris, where one of the featured invited ensembles was a Javanese gamelan. And so both Ravel and Debussy were captivated by this a wholly exotic sound, new to their ears, and they borrowed and were inspired by these wonderful sounds and techniques. And this is an example of, you can clearly hear the influence of the gamelan there in Granger's version. Another wonderful hidden gem on the Ravel program is a piece of his called Valse noble et sentimentale, Noble and Sentimental Waltzes, a title that he borrowed from Schubert, but precious little more than the title. It doesn't sound remotely like Schubert, but it does sound very much like Ravel. It was like almost all of Ravel's orchestral pieces initially in form for solo piano. It did not have a very successful first outing in Paris, partly because it was part of a concert where there was a gimmick whereby the pieces presented on the program were done so without the composer's name attached, and it was up to the audience to guess who the composer was. For some reason, very few people guessed Ravel, and the first waltz that I'm going to play for you was actually greeted with a lot of hissing and catcalls and giggles. I think probably because it is unusually subversive for a waltz, a form which had been brought to perfection by Johann Strauss, but Ravel kind of slyly puts in unexpected things like putting an accent on the third beat instead of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You hear 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and there is these clusters of chromatic, kind of almost like wrong notes. And I think that might have put the Paris audience a little bit off kilter. The piece itself, I'm not going to have time to play you the whole thing, but it consists of 7 waltzes plus an epilogue, more on which in a moment. But I'm going to play you the first 2 because they're the perfect example of what these 7 waltzes are about, which is to say short thumbnail sketches of a particular affect or state of mind. Ravel, like with the touch of a master sketch artist, manages to paint these various waltzes in completely different characters. The first one has a kind of air of rambunctiousness to it, as if we're being plunged onto the dance floor immediately, kind of the French equivalent of "take your partner by the hand." Whatever that is in French, I'm not quite sure. But immediately we are plunged into the wonderful glittering world of a Paris ballroom. It's fairly short, and the one that succeeds it is completely different. It's much more slow, it's quiet, it's reflective. It almost has the idea of perhaps a medieval troubadour because it's slightly modal. And again, a complete opposite from the first one. So here are the first 2 of the Ravel Valse noble et sentimentale. More magic from Ravel. For me, the most fascinating part of this sequence of waltzes is the epilogue, which is filled with a completely different world, and about which I will have more to say at the concert, to which you are all invited. That's all I'm going to say. Now, the last piece we're going to talk about this morning is actually not for orchestra at all. As you know, with the Music Festival presents a variety of different formats of music, including chamber music. And one of the absolute highlights of this season is going to be a performance of the Schubert Quintet in C major for 2 violins, viola, and 2 cellos. 4 musicians from our festival, Juliana Athaide, Kristen Ahlstrom, Marilène Jean-Garois, and Amos Yang will be joined by special guest Gauthier Capuçon, who is making a welcome return to the festival after a few years and will be playing with the orchestra the Elgar Concerto a couple of days before this performance of the Schubert. So we have a fantastic group of individuals playing what I say without fear of contradiction to be, I think, one of the greatest pieces of music ever written by anyone, anytime, anywhere. This is what's called the hard pitch. So this is by way of saying you need to be there for this concert. If you're somebody that thinks, oh, you know, I love the orchestra, it's great, that's what I come for, the big sound, but I'm not chamber music, I can take it or leave it. Do not leave it. This piece is an extraordinary journey over the course of almost an hour. It is a long song, but it takes you to places that you have never imagined if you've never heard this piece. It is laid out on an epic scale. It is Schubert at the height of his powers. And by the way, age 30. Bear in mind, this was written by a very young man and who only had 1 more year to live. I think this may have even been written in the last year of his life when he was 31. It's one of the great what-ifs of music history. This is what he was doing at age 30. Imagine what he would have done if he had lived to age 60. But I'll play a little bit of the first movement, a little bit of the second movement, just to give you an idea of the extraordinary sound world that Schubert inhabits here. Not just in the textures, which are in and of themselves unusual because of the addition of a second cello. String quintets, which were a relatively new form, tended to be for 2 violins, 2 violas, and 1 cello. Schubert played around with this and have 1 viola and 2 cellos. What he's able to do with that is create some really wonderful sonorities, which he explores throughout the piece. But more than anything else, it's the emotional range that he's able to accomplish or to achieve within the framework of the classical mode of expression. He's now, like Beethoven, on the cusp of the Romantic era. We hear this in a number of ways, not least of which is the expanded harmonic palette. But even at the very beginning, we are plunged into an ever-changing world of emotions that can turn on a dime. The very first chord you'll hear softly coming into focus is a major chord, and then immediately it turns to a diminished seventh, which is a kind of a dramatic chord, and then hints at the minor, and then coming back to the major, and then the minor again. And then a kind of an explosive piece of energy follows, a turbulence, and then a second theme, which is much more lyrical and suspended and flowing, and so on and so forth. There is just no end to the ways that he changes direction, takes us here, changes our consciousness. It's one thing after another, and it is wholly miraculous. So here's the beginning of the first movement. And back to the beginning. I hadn't meant to play you all of that, but I just couldn't press pause. Like a minor act of sacrilege. I think you'll understand why. And if you thought that was heavenly, just let me play you finally the very opening of the second movement, this slow movement. It really is truly a slow movement for one of the most otherworldly, exalted expressions of human art I think there is. In the middle of the texture, three instruments slowly moving, interacting with one another in this sort of sinuous, sensuous line, and on the top, violin just interjecting with the bow, bum, ba, ba, a little figure, and underneath, a cello playing pizzicato. These three elements to the texture, in the middle of which is this extraordinarily beautiful melody. Sorry. That goes on for another 15 minutes. And it's amazing how music can appear to have the power to stop time when it's in the right hands. And boy, is this piece in the right hands. So you have been warned. Mark the date in your books. That's a very, very special evening as part of a very special season. And I'm just so happy to be here. Looking forward to seeing the band take shape in the next few days and the pleasure of your company at all of these concerts. And with that, since it's close to the lunch hour, I remain at your disposal for any questions you might have about the music you've heard or anything else that might be on your mind, with my thanks. Yes?
Well, the piece that was orchestrated with the bells.
Yeah.
So I kind of understand the difference between orchestration and composition, but not totally. So were all the bells in the original? Okay.
Right. The question is, with the orchestration of the Vallée des Cloches, the Valley of the Bells, what was in the original? In the original was just a piano. That's all. And so you can find that online or YouTube. It was just Ravel's piano, just the piano, and as Ravel wrote it. So while there is piano in this piece, this is visually quite interesting. You'll see the percussionists. There are two pianos, one of which is played as a regular piano, the other of which is played by two percussionists as they hit with mallets the strings on the inside. They put down the sustaining pedal and they go chong, chong. So it has a kind of zingy percussive sound. None of which, of course, is in the original, as Ravel wrote it. But in this reimagination or orchestration by Granger, that's what we get to hear. Yes.
I'm gonna need some help with this
I'll
question.
come with the
In
mic.
Miss Ishmael's piece, it was sort of a Western, do I have to? There was the combination of Western and Eastern music, and the talas are usually like a 16 count, 14 count, but often commonly a 13 count. And I didn't hear that reflected in the Western side of the music. Was it resolved in the end? Did it challenge it or mirror it in some way?
That is a fantastic question that I am completely unable to answer. I defer to your clearly greater expertise. Who you should come to the rehearsal and talk to Arun about it, because he might be able to shed more light on it. It's just not it's not in my wheelhouse. So I know when I'm defeated, I can't even pretend to form a good answer. So I'll shut up now. Great. Yes.
Maybe a strange question. You talked about texture and so forth. And I'm wondering, do you see a connection between Bach and Jackson Pollock? Balance, texture, a number of things.
Well, the second question in a row that I wasn't quite expecting. Well, I love these together, these talks so much, you never know what you're going to hear next. The connection between Bach and Jackson Pollock is not something I have pondered up until this moment. Clearly you have, and it's something for me to chew over on my lunch. Again, I'm not sure I have a terribly good answer. Gosh, I'd like to know what you think is the connection between Bach and Jackson Pollock.
Question of ChatGPT, different ways. I got two different answers. One was a great deal, the other was not at all. But balance, texture, a number of things that describe Bach also describe Jackson Pollock.
Could well be in terms of form. It's not what I would have. I'm more inclined to think the latter than the former. I can't think of any. I'm not an expert on. I'm not really an expert on Bach, and I'm certainly not an expert on Jackson Pollock. But the little that I do know of her work doesn't seem to have a whole. That Venn diagram is pretty thin on the outside. But you've got me thinking, so something to think about over lunch. What else? Yes.
What was your inspiration for putting this season together? Little story.
Overview of the
this season.
inspiration? Well, as always, striking a balancing act between all of the various options on the table, making sure the orchestra is heard in the wonderful virtuosic instrument that it is, inviting a slew of fantastic A-list guest artists, blending the familiar and the unfamiliar. So we've got Tchaikovsky and Beethoven and Brahms, along with Esmail and Gabriela Smith and Anna Klein and some, various other composers. So there's no, I would say honestly, there's no overarching theme except, keep the balanced diet and make sure that everything is of as good a quality as we can imagine. But there's not a theme to the season. I mean, it's so happened that we have a number of fourth symphonies, Beethoven 4, Brahms 4, and Schumann 4. That is just a happy coincidence. And it also happens that we have a number of concerts where there's only one composer represented, all Ravel, all Strauss to end, the Schubert Quintet, which is, of course, a single piece, the Brahms 4, which is a single piece. These were more coincidental than anything else. So I just... I don't like to be hemmed in, and the beauty of having this fantastic blank canvas at my disposal that I get to paint all sorts of pretty patterns, just like Jackson Pollock. How I work that in. I think I'm going to quit while I'm ahead and say thank you all very much for coming. I'm looking forward to the concerts. You could call the my hot mic.